Hi folks, the following tutorial is going to show you how to pull marks from SASAMS onto your reports where a school has a year-to-date CAS, or you could say your final SBA mark, and the final exam mark, and then using your year weighting in front office you calculate the final mark. So roughly speaking, for the most part, in your juniors you have the 40%, 60% split, 40 SBA, 60 final exam. In seniors it tends to be 25-75 SBA exam. So in this particular case, if you were to have a look at this design, the design of this report, you can see that in the year-to-date CAS mark, as I say, or SBA, final SBA mark, they're referencing term 4, which is labeled RD4 in front office. So essentially in the RD4 column they are wanting to enter the final SBA mark as calculated by SASAMS. In the past, folks tended to enter have the final percentage, which looks at the year weighting, look at term 1, 2, 3 and 4 classwork, and split them 25, 25, 25. But you'll see that in the way the SBA mark is calculated in SASAMS, and therefore supposedly is according to CAPS, apparently there are discrepancies, but at the end of the day the final acceptance or not is going to be done by the people who check SASAMS, and so you're going to want your schedules to correlate with that. So anyway, if you were to look at SASAMS itself, you would see, for instance, that if you look at the SBA component, for example, which makes up 25% of the mark, you can see that term 1, the totals of term 1 don't equal up to an equal proportion of term 1, 2 and 3, and indeed what would ultimately be the SBA component for term 4, which there isn't actually, and I'll take you through the weightings and how this particular mark sheet is set up as well. But so what you're wanting to do is you're wanting to find the mark that SASAMS calculates as the SBA mark. Okay, so the trick is that, the problem is that in the way the current mark sheets are set up, and as I've explained in previous emails, come 2019, we're going to, continue to build on the development done on the mark sheets, and so we'll hopefully have a more refined solution in terms of pulling marks through automatically on the report. But currently, as it stands in your final mark sheet, which would look something like this, you don't have any way of calculating the SBA mark, because you've only got the term 4 components, and you don't want to be having to go back to the term 1 to 3 mark sheets to find the mark. But what you can do, as shown in the previous tutorials with regards to subject splits, and that's why I'm grouping it with those tutorials, is because it's about pulling a mark off SASAMS. So if you take English, for example, firstly let's just note that on this mark sheet which columns you'll be capturing in, and as I say, I've explained before in emails and in tutorials as well, that the simple thing to do to see which columns you're going to be capturing on the mark sheets is to look at SASAMS and look at the columns that are blank. Remember, the rule of thumb is, as I've always said on our mark sheets, is that our mark sheets produce only tasks where there are no activities. The columns where the mark sheets produce columns where there are tasks that don't have activities, or only the activities within a task. Okay, so in other words, only the columns where you capture. So if you look at this one, for instance, we get the corresponding mark sheet. The columns you'll be capturing in obviously are these first 4 columns here. Alright, so you've got task oral 4, you've got P1 language, okay, and P2 literature, paper 2 literature, paper 3 writing, so these are the exams essentially. That's your task for oral. And then these remaining columns are all columns that are auto-calculated by SAM. So you needn't be capturing in these columns, because when these marks are pushed through to SAMS, the marks will calculate themselves on the SAM side. Now, just to run you through briefly what is going on here on the SAM side, if you're entering a mark, you might be confused by say, well, this mark is weighted 0. The task for oral mark itself it does actually count, in the sense that it counts 16.67% of the final exam mark. In other words, of this 75, well, let's just say it counts 16.67% of the final 75% that the final exam counts. And so what happens is you enter this final mark, and it reflects in the 4th oral, and this entire mark forms a mark out of 50, which becomes part of the entire oral mark for the year, which then counts 16.75% of the 75 for the year. So the SBA does not include orals. The orals for the entire year are lumped together as a sort of 4th component of the final exam, if you like. So that just briefly explains how that works and why those 2 areas are weighted north. Essentially, they're just like calculation points, if you like. That mark flowing into that column, calculating a final mark which flows back into that column, and this ultimately becomes the entire component, or the final component for the calculation of the exam mark. So okay, what I'm going to do is get marks into the dummy marks into the mark sheets and pop those through to front office and sync them with SAMS so that we get this all populated, and then I'm going to show you how to get that SBA mark out into a percentage that we're going to copy into front office, and so that they all reflect on the report. Right, so we got some marks in there, and we're going to import those into front office and then sync with SAM. Okay, so we've set the import folder location, and we import. Importing is complete. Split tasks and activities. Post to front office. And then do a 3B SAMS true mark sync. Right, and so now you are sitting with all the final marks in SAMS, so we can save that mark sheet to get it to save. All those red blocks. Right, and what you can do then is export to Excel. And what I like to do is rename the file so that it makes a bit more sense. You leave the date in there, that's fairly handy, and the time. And then say, for instance, let's say grade 10 English Yeah, that'll do for now, I guess. So you could say year end. Don't like to normally actually leave spaces in my file names. Right, then. Right, so after you've saved the file, you can open it. Now you can add columns here and you can manipulate things. So for instance, we're looking at the SBA year mark. We know that's the mark out of 240, so it's fairly simple at this point to calculate a final SBA percentage. So let's just call this exactly that, SBA percentage, and quite simply you just say equals that mark divided by the total. Let's keep that row constant so we can copy and paste the mark down, multiplied by 100. Okay, copy and la paste. Just joking, I don't really know what the French for is for paste, but right, so now I blocked the names of the learners, but they are A to Z, and that's how they save and export from SASAMS. So now all we have to do is dump this into the RD4 column in FrontOFFICE. So what I suggest you do is go to data editing, academics, okay, and you want to filter on your subject, and you want to filter on your grade. Okay, you can filter out the lefts. Remember, of course, that before doing this you need to have done an admin sync, because you need to make sure that obviously the learners on the SASAMS final mark sheet that you had, that you and the final mark sheets that you pushed out for teachers to capture marks in, match of course what is in FrontOFFICE as well. So essentially it's going to be current learners. If they've left in FrontOFFICE, they will have been archived in SASAMS, and so only the current learners. And then I've hidden the learners' names here, but basically all you have to do is A to Z on the learner name, which contains the surname and then first name, and orders itself exactly in the same way that SASAMS does. And you can just do a basic check. So in this case you can see there are a record count of 39 learners, and in SASAMS itself it shows the 39 learners. Right, so the column you wanted to grab was the SBA percentage column, and recall that the SBA or final year-to-date CAS mark was going into RD4, so you paste that in. Okay, don't worry that it carries a load of decimals with it. This really is background storage, if you like, on the reports or any front-end materials, or the results themselves, for example, are calculated based on a rounded off mark. Now if we just return for a second to the mark sheet itself, I beg your pardon, to the exported mark sheet. Again, we wanted to get an exam mark. Now, bearing in mind that from your mark sheets, once again, for a subject like English, it wasn't obvious as to exactly what the exam mark was on the mark sheet, because in fact, obviously, it was finally calculated by a series of calculations that happen on this mark sheet and marks pulling from previous terms, okay, which haven't obviously occurred on these mark sheets here. As I say, this is something we'll work on in future. But again, by having exported your final mark sheet from SASAMS to Excel, you can derive the final mark fairly simply. So if you insert another column here, sorry, let's just get rid of the copied cells. And let's say final exam percentage. Probably better just to, doesn't really matter, you're just labeling it for your own sake. And again, what you're saying is equals the mark divided by the total multiplied by 100, and of course hold the total row constant so that you can copy and paste the mark down the page. Okay, copy and paste. Oh, sorry, one other thing is you sometimes have to note that these things store as, for whatever reason, they store as text fields, text data, and you should change it to number data, and then change them to number fields, and then just rewrite these numbers in. Okay, and then just, as I said before, copy and paste. And then what you can do, if you really want to double check, is you can actually take these two percentage marks now and sort of reverse the process, and reverse the process to see if you arrive at the final mark that SASAMS does. In other words, we've taken them out of their raw scores and turned them into a mark out of 75 and a mark out of 25, and then we put them back, if you like, into a mark out of 100. But if you then create a column and you say the final exam percentage that we calculated multiplied by 0.75, in other words, a percentage plus the final SBA mark multiplied by 0.25, in other words, the final percentage that SBA counts, you'll see that you arrive at the same mark that SASAMS does, certainly if you round off to 2 decimal places. So that is essentially what you're going to do in front office. We push this mark through to RD4. Now we're going to push this mark through to RD6. Okay, so let's grab this mark here. I think we did. And simply pop it into RD6. We have everything organized already. Right, so now you'll see that what we do in the year weighting in set classes is we make it 0, 0, 0. In this case you want 25, 75, right? So you make that 1, 0, 3. Okay, and then 0, 0, 0, 0. So in other words, take this mark, multiply it by 1, take that mark, multiply it by 3, add them together and divide by 4. It is exactly the same as the formula we did here. Okay, take the mark, multiply it by 3/4, and take the other mark and multiply it by 1/4. Okay, and you'll arrive at exactly the correct mark. So if we were to go to directly to the report now, well, I'll tell you what, we'll go to set classes to see the year weighting. Okay, so this school currently doesn't have a 00001. Yes, they do. There you go. 00013. Okay, so that is exactly the weighting you'll be choosing that we want. Again, as I say, it's going to take RD4 multiplied by 1/4 and RD6 and multiplied by 3/4 and add them together. Right, and you'll see this first learner got 85 and 53 for the final average of 77, and you'll see 85 and 53 with the final mark of 77. Right, so if you do that for all your grades and subjects, that is exactly how you can populate the final report by retaining a CAS mark exactly as SAMS calculates it, the final exam mark exactly as SAMS calculates it, and just allow front office to take the two, combine them by whatever the weighting is. They're supposed to be, as I say, generally 40-60 for 1 to 9 and 25-75 for seniors. It is different in some subjects, so make sure of that, and do the weighting accordingly. Contact us if you're not sure how to work that out. And front office will calculate the final mark for you. And what is more important is that your final mark will match exactly what SAMS calculates, so there can be no discrepancy between the final promotion mark and final promotion results, therefore, between the two systems. And all your external department side of things is therefore taken care of, as well as your internal reporting processes. That concludes this tutorial.